Today we're thinking about this question, questionable life. Is Christianity actually good news? Those of you who have read any of the gospel accounts, the biblical accounts of Jesus' life, will know that he sometimes seems to make statements that are just bizarre, that seem to be completely counterproductive to what he is seeking to achieve. At this one point, Jesus is in the middle of a section encouraging people to be his disciple, and yet he offers these very strange words. I'll read these so that those at the back can maybe hear them a bit more. Jesus said this: If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. A little bit later on he says, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Now I wonder how these words strike you. They kind of seem quite counterintuitive, don't they, to a man who is seeking to encourage people to follow him. Now, this teaching of Jesus, I think, becomes slightly more understandable when we understand that the words love and hate were used as Jewish idioms for prefer or not prefer. So I could say to you, I love football, I hate rugby. And that would cause, no doubt, a few of you to start hating me, particularly at this time in the middle of the Six Nations. But even if you hold that statement to be true about Jesus' teaching, this word of love and hate only makes Jesus' teaching slightly more bearable, doesn't it? Even then, Jesus' teaching packs a punch. Unless you prefer me over every human relationship, you cannot be my disciple. Doesn't the second sentence demand even more still? Whoever does not carry their own cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Now let me say there was only one group in Jesus' day that would carry their crosses, and it was condemned criminals who were on their way to their own execution. And so Jesus is saying, look, if you're to be my disciple, it requires you to have such fidelity and loyalty to me that you would be willing to undergo the most shameful of deaths if required. Or as the last sentence summarizes it, giving up everything in order to put him first. Is Christianity really good news? Well, hold this alongside the fact that the Greek word gospel that appears throughout the New Testament means that very phrase, good news. In fact, Jesus' first recorded words as an adult include that word, repent and believe the gospel. Repent and believe the good news. Jesus says, I am all about good news. My kingdom is all about good news. And so we're left with this question, aren't we? How do we possibly square this idea that it is good news for us to prefer Jesus above all other human beings and to be prepared to die and to renounce all we have? It doesn't strike many of our ears as sounding like very good news. But here is the answer, and here is the heartbeat that underlies Jesus' teaching. Jesus is saying that knowing me and knowing all I offer is so good, then unless you are prepared to reevaluate everything that you value and desire and want to possess, and yet discover that they are left wanting compared to what is offered in him, then you have not understood quite how good his good news is. About 10 years ago, I met a student from the Middle East called Amir. He ended up coming to a set of events very similar to this in the university at which he was studying a master's degree, and it was the city that I used to live in at the time. And though he came from an Islamic background, and though he was a Muslim, over the week and over the months that followed, he came to believe that Christianity was true, that Jesus was no mere prophet, but was the Son of God. Though Amir became incredibly frightened about what that might mean for him as a Muslim. Now, the day before Amir was due to return home to a country in the Middle East, a group of us gathered at my house because we had arranged to have a goodbye party for him. And so we had a sort of barbecue in my back garden, and it was just a really happy evening saying goodbye to somebody who becomes such a dear friend to us. But as the evening began to draw to a close and the sun went down, Amir turned the conversation to Christianity and his return home. And it was one of the most powerful moments of my life, because I remember him saying to me with tears in his eyes, "Do you realize if I go home to my country and live publicly as a Christian, I may well be put to death?" And that was no mere hyperbole. It was true, actually. In that country, at that time, there was a very real prospect that somebody going in as a convert from Islam to Christianity might be put to death, that they might have to pay the ultimate price for their discipleship to Jesus. I remember tears streaming down Amir's face. And tears began to stream down the faces of quite a number of other people that were there too. And I remember looking him in the eye and saying to him, "Amir, I believe that it is better to be dead with Jesus than alive without him. I believe that it is better to lose everything and have Jesus than to have everything without him." Is that a scandalous statement to say to a person returning home to that sort of situation? Well, in the remainder of my time, I want to unpack some of why I felt that I was able to make that sort of statement to Amir. What is it about Christianity that is such good news that it is worthy of embrace, even at the highest of costs? This lunchtime, I just want to sketch out two aspects. There are many more, but two aspects of the good news that Jesus brings. Firstly, the way in which it addresses us personally, and secondly, the way in which this good news spills out of us to the wider world. Here's the first one then. Christianity is good news of complete forgiveness. Christianity is good news because we're invited into the closest of personal relationships with the God who made us and who loves us. During a conference on comparative religion at Oxford University a number of decades ago, a series of experts were summoned from around the world to debate what, if any, aspect was distinctive to Christianity in a world of religions. And they began eliminating a whole number of possibilities. And apparently what happened is that the debate went on for some time until C.S. Lewis, some of you will know he was an Oxford and later Cambridge Don who had become a Christian in later life, wandered into the room. He asked what the subject of the conversation was, and he heard that his colleagues were debating this question: what is Christianity's unique contribution in a world of religions? And in his own sort of perceptive way, Lewis is reported to have said, "Oh, that's easy, it's grace," and then turned out and left the room. Grace, says C.S. Lewis, grace. Grace is the notion that God extends to us his own love, free of charge, and with no strings attached, at the greatest of costs to himself. That is what C.S. Lewis said was the unique distinction about Christianity. And perhaps it's unique because this idea of grace seems to go against every instinct that we have as human beings. Many of us, I think, would tacitly hold the idea that if God is there, then there must be some sort of way in which we can earn God's approval through what we do or through what we say or through what we think. But Jesus claims to reveal God to us and then promises to us that God's love and forgiveness extend to us contra-conditionally. Contra-conditionally. It doesn't extend to us conditionally, that is, I will love and forgive you if you do these things. It doesn't even come to us unconditionally, I will love you because of who you are. It comes to us contra-conditionally. He offers grace and love to us, despite what we do, despite what we think, despite what we're like. Grace. Now, all of this is because Jesus dared to provide a more radical diagnosis of the problem of humanity than any other religious teacher. One day, Jesus was confronted by the religious people of his day, and they asked him this question: why do you and your disciples not bother with ritual hand washing? It was the sort of latest tradition of personal piety of the day, which was supposed to guard you spiritually. I mean, many other similar formulations would be put forward today, external things that you can do, which in some way, adherents would say, change us internally. You know, if you go to the right places, if you keep the right company, if you eat the right foods, if you wear the right clothes, if you go on pilgrimage to the right places at the right time, if you read the right books, if you avoid going to certain places, the list is endless. The promise is that it will lead to inner transformation. But you know what? Jesus dared to trump all of these diagnoses. He said, your problem isn't at a behavioral level, but something much deeper. And Jesus located the cause of human brokenness at a much deeper level than mere externals that we can control. And so he once uttered these words. Jesus says, for it is from within, not outside, within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these come from within and defile a person. I've got to say, this is a much more negative view of myself than I often hold. I often think it's the situations that I find myself in and the people that I hang around with who just cause me to do things that I wish I didn't do. But according to Jesus, the problem isn't the company that I keep that causes me to slip into arrogance. The problem is that I am an arrogant person, and arrogance bubbles up from within inside. The situations I find myself in, the company I keep, according to Jesus, are not the cause of my arrogance, but merely the occasion for its expression. So often I can blame my anger on a traffic jam, but the evil thoughts I feel towards other people in the traffic jam are not caused by the traffic jam. The traffic jam is just the occasion for my evil thoughts, not its cause. And so the big issue, according to Jesus here, is where my heart lies. The fundamental orientation of the effective core of me. And so according to Jesus, the problem is not that there are too many traffic jams. The problem is that I, from deep within, am an angry, arrogant person. And do you know what? Pretty much every other word in that description describes me too. See, when I listen to Jesus and don't write him off as a radical, but as one who claims to speak as God, I'm free to admit that I am more rotten from the inside than I often dare contemplate. And so I have caused more hurt to other people in the world than I often dare contemplate too. The problem isn't just that the world has too many traffic jams. The situations I find myself in, the traffic jams I sit in, are the occasion and not the cause of my wrong actions. The big problem is where my heart lies. And my actions demonstrate that my heart is, naturally speaking, far from God and his ways. Coldplay lead singer Chris Martin, we heard him singing just a few minutes ago, didn't we? Was brought up as a Christian. His Some members of his family, his parents, his siblings, still are Christians. And he's chosen to walk away from Christianity, at least for the time being. But once you know the Christian background that Chris Martin has, you'll see that Christian lyric after Christian lyric shows itself in Coldplay songs. And one of the most haunting lyrics I find is from Clocks. It's a little bit old now. But Chris Martin is thinking about the brokenness of the world and the brokenness of humanity. And he asks this question: am I part of the cure? Or am I part of the disease? And the truth is that instinctively we like to think of ourselves as being those who alleviate the problems of the world, not contribute to them. But do you see, Jesus' words cut through this overly inflated opinion of ourselves. Regardless of the great things that you may do, regardless of the kindness that you show your friends, regardless of the love that you sometimes find yourself showing almost despite yourself, Jesus says we are part of the disease, and we are part of the disease because we're human. And the truth is that each of us is not only oppressed by certain other people because of this dynamic, but we too sometimes find ourselves playing the role of the oppressor. And all of this roots, according to Jesus, from the fundamental nature of our heart. It is far from God and his ways, and the defiance of our hearts leads to disaster. Now, I'm sure you're not particularly enjoying hearing this, and I've got to say I'm not particularly enjoying saying it. But actually, doesn't this make sense of the world? Doesn't Jesus' diagnosis only explain why there are bombs over Syria and starving refugees there? But also those things which would never make the TV news, but which still heap brokenness onto the human experience. It's not just the people on the news who are responsible for the world's brokenness. But each of us too is culpable. Each of us too spurns God, destroying the planet, destroying other people, and even destroying ourselves. And just notice where Jesus says that leaves us. Defiled, unclean. You might remember, like me, times from your childhood trying to come indoors, having played outdoors. I remember on one occasion, one November, coming back in that state, having played outdoors, school uniform still on, mud absolutely everywhere on my uniform, on my face, in my hair. And my mum just said, "There is no way you are coming into the kitchen like that." She'd just spent a while cleaning the kitchen floor. I was unclean. I was defiled. I couldn't come into the house. And so it was only once I was sort of stripped of the offending clothes and sort of had this hose that was sprayed at me that I was allowed to come into the house and have a shower and warm up again. Now, when Jesus talks about being defiled, about being unclean, he's not talking about dirty hair or hands or clothing. Do you see? He's talking about dirty hearts. To the God who is clean, to the God who is completely loving and pure and just, and he will not let evil have the last say in his universe, we can't come into his presence, not as we are. And the key thing which I've come to learn is it's precisely because God is love that we can't come in. God is ultimately setting up through Jesus a kingdom which matches his utter goodness. And so nothing which is on this list can be part of this kingdom. Which means that as we are, none of us can be part of that kingdom either without his help. We are completely ruled out. And so, naturally speaking, each of us faces the verdict of judgment that he will bring not only upon humanity as a whole, but upon each of our lives as he purges all that is wrong in the universe. It's sober, this, isn't it? It's really sober, because we assume if there is a God, we'll be welcomed with open arms into his kingdom. We assume we'll be okay. But Jesus spoke time and time again about coming to inaugurate a whole new world order in which there is no more brokenness, where all of the brokenness in the world is fixed. And that means a big feature of this kingdom is peace and harmony and joy and love. But because, naturally speaking, each of us robs the world of these things, of peace, of harmony, of love, of joy, we can't be part of his kingdom because of the fundamental misalignment of our hearts. I don't enjoy breaking bad news. But if you are to understand the jaw-dropping good news of Christianity, you have to look this bad news in the eye. Because as long as you write Jesus off as just being a bit too radical, you will never come to appreciate the good news which comes in Jesus' work for us. And that brings us back to the thing about Christianity which is utterly unique in a world of religion. Do you remember C.S. Lewis's answer? Grace. The contra-conditional love of God for us that meets our need. See, not only is Jesus' diagnosis of humanity more radical than anything else, so is his solution. And so it turns out that, as C.S. Lewis went on to one day write, God doesn't want anything from us. God simply wants us. The gospel accounts tell us that Jesus didn't come primarily as a teacher to tell us what to do, but he came as a savior to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. Look, none of us can change our hearts. Not at the deep level. No amount of external action can change us from the inside out. And yet at the cross, Jesus took upon himself all of our uncleanliness in order to make us clean. He willingly took upon his own shoulders the moral guilt that each of us has incurred. And he took it to the cross, and he took our punishment for us in his love. He did it not because we deserved it. Grace is contra-conditional. But because of Jesus' love for us, no matter the level of dirtiness we have accrued, no matter the means by which we've accrued it, no matter how dirty in a sense you may feel, Jesus welcomes you home. And you can be absolutely sure of your place in his kingdom when he returns, because he transforms you from the inside out. About 10 years ago, when I was still a student in Bristol, I got to know a fellow student called Matt. I was a fourth year. He was a first year. In some ways, he had lived a more obviously immoral life than I guess many of us will have done here. He was deeply involved in the drug scene. He, in fact, was a drug dealer. He'd been in and out of prison, having treated a number of women very badly. And Matt eventually ended up coming along to some of these things at Bristol University. He was only too aware of his dirtiness. He didn't need to be persuaded of that. But over the months and years that followed, including through a CU Events Week like this, Matt came to trust Jesus for himself, and slowly, that forgiveness began to penetrate his heart. Slowly it hit home. I remember one beautiful June afternoon at Cabot Tower. Some of you from Bristol might know it, Brandon Hill Park in Bristol. And I met Matt for breakfast and for lunch, and he just had a shower. He'd only got up that morning, and he told me that for the first time, as the water physically hit him, it struck his heart that all his dirtiness, past, present, future, had been washed away in its entirety by Jesus. And he told me, I feel clean for the first time in years. Now, whether or not this lunchtime you are aware of your dirtiness and carry it around with you like Matt, the sober truth is that each of us stands before the God who is love, dirty. Each of us needs to be washed. But there is this wonderful invitation that through Jesus' death on the cross, he might take your punishment for you. And though, as one Bible verse puts it, though we are as scarlet, he will wash you as white as snow. Let me say that deals with the failure of the past. It gives strength for the present. It gives hope for the future. You're invited into a relationship with God where you are secure of where you stand. You learn to love the things that he loves. Yes, you will fail. But then, even then, as you bring your failure to Jesus, he doesn't drive you away. There is infinite grace that is extended to you as you seek to live for him. You can be part of his kingdom. I can be part of his kingdom, regardless of what we are like. That is good news to me. That was good news to Matt that afternoon in Bristol. That was good news to Amir. I hope you can see that's good news for you as well. Secondly, much more briefly, I want to suggest that Christianity is not only good news for us individually, but also Christianity is good news for the world. See, if you have truly tasted this contra-conditional grace, you cannot be the same. It cannot be contained. It sort of spills out of you, and you find yourself swept up into God's big program for the world. As we've said, the thrust of Christianity, the crux of Christianity, is about coming to know the one true God through Jesus. And as we get to know him better, we discover not only that there are plenty of ways that we are wrong and need to ask for forgiveness, but there are plenty of things that are wrong with the world. There are plenty of characteristics of the world that he hates. And as the Bible reveals God to us as one who is deeply broken and angry by these effects of human rebellion, and yet compassionate on those who are suffering, we cannot be unmoved. See, one day Jesus said that he was going to come back and he will put the world right. We are closer to that moment now than we were at the beginning of the week. Evil and all of its effects will be done away with in this world once and for all. And yet, in the meantime, the Bible's expectation is that those who are loved by Jesus, and therefore who love Jesus, will be spurred to action. Let me put it like this. Jesus someday is going to destroy disease and hunger and poverty and loneliness and injustice and even death itself. And do you know what? That gives Christians like me a new focus. Not only do we passionately call people to know forgiveness and grace while there's still time, as we've been seeking to do this week, we're also called to engage the world in the midst of its brokenness. We're called to hate the things our God hates and to be moved to action. And so Christianity becomes what C.S. Lewis called a fighting religion. Not that we go out and commit war, but when we are confronted with the least, the last, and the lost, we are spurred to action, to fight those things. And so perhaps it's not surprising that Jesus' followers have been spurred to do a great deal of good throughout the centuries and are still doing it today. Of course, I don't mean to say that every good and generous person in history has been a Christian, although that's true today. And of course, there are many good and noble people in lots of the world's religions, as well as many good and noble atheists and agnostics. What strikes you, though, when you look into the history of this, though, is the scale of it all. You may find someone who tells you that they were spurred to tackling suffering, or helping the needy or the vulnerable, or working for the environment through their embrace of atheism. I guess that's technically possible. But as we've said a few times this week, that seems to come in spite of atheist convictions and not because of them. And so for every lovely, philanthropic atheist that you might meet, I would pretty much bet my bottom dollar that there would be many, many, many more who would be doing very similar activities, but who would claim to be motivated by the love of Jesus. We're changed at the deepest level, and so as Christians are helped by God to appreciate the grace we've received, we're spurred and empowered to make a difference in the world. You might think of the Earl of Shaftesbury. He was known as the poor man's Earl because so many poor people came to his funeral. He did much to reform the UK's attitude towards the mentally ill. He changed the nation's laws on child labour. He changed the nation's laws on the employment of children in mining. He changed the law when it came to care for the elderly and even education reform. And he was explicit all the way through that it was his Christian profession that motivated him. The great biographer Georgina Battiscombe dared to write this of him. Get this sentence. This is about Lord Shaftesbury. No man has in fact ever done more to lessen the extent of human misery or to add to the sum total of human happiness. What an amazing statement. Today you might think about Christians Against Poverty, which provides free debt help to anyone in debt, regardless of their religious beliefs. You might think of the Christian-founded Trussell Trust, the biggest network of food banks in the UK, which gave out nearly 1 million food parcels last year. You might think of voluntary youth work, 88% of which, according to the latest government figures, is offered by Christians. You might think of the Home for Good initiative, which encourages people to open their homes through adopting and fostering children. We might even think of Christian students at Durham. A recent study of university students, including a large cohort from Durham, found that active Christians, including those in the Christian Union here, your friends, were the most likely people to be civically engaged and involved in charitable activity outside of explicitly Christian activities, such as going to church. I don't know huge numbers of Christians in Durham, but I do know a few of them. And while they are not perfect and while they fail, many of the Christians I know here demonstrate a real concern for the welfare of others. Many go out of their way to care for others. They care for the ignored. Think of your Christian friends. Do you see anything different in them? They won't be perfect. Of course they're not perfect. They need ongoing forgiveness too. But as they are growing to know Jesus and his love for them better, do you see any difference in their values and the way in which they live and treat other people? And then consider this. Today, Jesus is calling you to believe his good news, that you too can know complete forgiveness, and that as you know him with his help, you can expect his relationship with you to spill out into any number of other relationships and places. Despite your weakness, despite your track record, the one true God invites you to be part of his big story, to bring hope and healing to the world, as you wait for him with the ultimate hope of bringing the ultimate healing when he returns. Now, I've got to say, I never found out what happened to Amir. He returned to his country, and then our contact stopped. Facebook didn't exist in that country at that time. In fact, it may still not exist. And it was very difficult to maintain any sort of contact. So I don't know what happened to Amir the day after that barbecue when he returned home. Perhaps Amir never gave his life to Jesus. Maybe. But perhaps he did. And that might mean that perhaps he's dead. But it might mean that perhaps he's alive and tasting God's love and forgiveness for him. He's playing his part in God's program to that very needy country in the Middle East, offering hope and forgiveness from God to people from that country, and spurred to action as he sees things that the one true God hates. But I believe that whatever happened to him, whether he is alive or dead, becoming a Christian is the best possible thing that could have happened to him, despite the cost. Jesus himself taught that even if being his disciple causes you to lose everything, the only sane thing is to pick up your cross and carry it, even if it means going with him to death. How about you? How about you? Becoming a Christian won't be easy. You don't have to do it alone. God gives you other Christians. He also gives you of himself. But it won't be easy. It's not easy submitting your hopes, your dreams, and your desires to another person, even when you're surrendering them to someone who has so clearly demonstrated that he's for us, like Jesus did at the cross. Becoming a Christian might not make you popular. In fact, it might lose you some friends. Family and friends might question your judgment, and for some here it might even cost us something more than that. But, says Jesus, you can know that my gospel is truly good news. There's forgiveness for the past, provision in the present, hope for the future, and that you too can be swept up into the big story as God judges evil and renews the universe, despite what you're like. Thanks.
I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get through all the questions that you've texted in, but if we don't get through your question, please write it on a comment card, and we'll be happy to get back to you. But we're going to take probably one question now, which is, if the heart of humanity is dark and kindness cannot change that, what's the point in doing good things? Why do we try and better ourselves to impress God if it doesn't matter anyway?
Okay, this is quite a long question. It's quite complicated as well. I'll do the second part first. Why do we try to better ourselves to impress God if it doesn't matter anyway? Christianity is not about impressing God. Christianity is not about impressing God. It's impossible for us to impress God. So I sort of reject the basis that the question is asked upon. Christianity is not about impressing God or doing things for God. It's about receiving what he freely offers us. And the Bible will say that when we're swept up into receiving not only something which objectively meets our need, but which demonstrates grace and love, even that magnitude of love can free us to look away from ourselves and to serve others in love. That's hopefully what I was trying to communicate in the message there. If the heart of humanity is dark and kindness cannot change it, what's the point in doing good things? The point in doing good things is that we have been brought into, if you're a Christian, you've been brought into a relationship with a one true God who loves you, who's given you everything, and who calls you to know him. And so as we know him and as that spills out into relationship with others, that colours our relationships. It colours our relationship with him. It colours our relationship with others. It is true that if God doesn't exist, if Jesus is not the revelation of God, you do have to ask the question, well, what is the point in doing kind things for other people, particularly when they aren't kind to me in return?